for all of you for coming. This is the first event of the series of DARIAH, new series of lecture afternoons with DARIAH. And today is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Wolfgang Göderle. So let me introduce you the lecturer today. He will be talking about unlocking schematismus. Just have more about in his lecture, but he's a research leader and senior postdoc at the Center for Information Modeling, University of Graz, and where he leads this project unlocking schematismus. Since October 2025, he also serves as a professor of computational humanities in the University of Passau. He studied in University of Graz and Sciences Po in Paris, earning his doctorate in 2014. As I know, it was about censuses, and he wrote a really good book about it, Census and Ethnicität, if anyone else is interested. So his research focused on Central European history, digital history, and computational methods in the humanities. He's also explored environmental, social, and economic history. He is also a research associate at Max Planck Institute for Geoanthropology in Vienna and teaches digital history at the University of Vienna. His research combines historical expertise with advanced computational approaches to analyze large-scale historical data sets and develop new methodologies for digital humanity research. He has published extensively on Habsburg history, administrative structures, and application of the machine learning to historical sources. Welcome. Thank you for coming and for yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me and for having me here. Just 1 second, I'm going to sit over here because I think I should use that kind of microphone somehow. I've come to present to you one of our 2 large projects that we are currently running, and both projects are dealing with the extraction of information from large bodies of historical primary sources, and the one being the Schematismus, and the other one being the Franciscan cadastre. I don't dare to pronounce that in Slovene, but I think some of you will know what I am talking about here. And actually the cadastral map data extraction is probably the more illustrative one, but I think the Schematismus project has more promise to the entire field that we are pursuing here. So let me start with the Schematismus right here. Just some short details on the Schematismus. May I ask, who of you knows what the Schematismus is? Okay, no one else? It's very unfortunate because it's a fantastic primary source. It's a bit difficult to find actually. So, can I just change the screen for a little second, and I'm going to show you the Schematismus in short so that everybody knows where to find it. 1 second. Microsoft Edge, that should be working. Okay, you just enter alex.onb.ac.at, because for everybody dealing with some sort of Central European history, this is an incredible resource. Welcome to the website of the Austrian National Library. As you can see, it's German only, which is super cool. You just click on the top left branch, you scroll down until you can't scroll anymore, and there it is. Among Verzeichnisse, you find at the bottom Staatshandbuch. Staatshandbuch does not sound like much, but I will show you right now. It starts in 1702. It's less interesting in 1702 because the information it contains then is very much restricted to Vienna and to the court of Vienna. But very early in the 19th century, around 1807, things become really wild. And the Schematismus becomes a kind of a phone book for the entire monarchy. So if you are ever looking for a high or a low ranking person in Carniola, in Kraina, have a look. Right here you can see I picked 1876. 1876 is already a great year here, and we just go to Herzogtum Krain, and you can see the Landeshauptmann here, so the governor. Then you can see pretty much the entire high-ranking political and administrative elites for Carniola listed here for every single year. And what is more impressive here, you not only have the administration and also the political administration at the provincial level, you also have it at the ministerial level, and in particular, you have the different branches of the central administration as it was represented in Krain. And what I very much like here, for instance, is the KK Grundlasten Ablösungs- und Regulierung Landeskommission. So you see that's the large processes that the Habsburg central state initiated in the earlier and mid-19th century. It left traces, and these traces can be tracked via the Staatshandbuch quite easily. Let's see something else. There is something else I have a strong passion for, which is the forest administration. Let's see where the forest administration is. If someone of you is interested in, that's for instance, that's the schools. So gender history, the Hebammenlehranstalt, so that's the midwife school. So the fascinating thing about the Schematismus is that starting in the very early 1800s, it becomes a primary source that discloses a lot of information on middle-class populations of Central Europe. So you can see who was a school teacher in Maribor in 1817, if you're lucky. I don't promise that to you, but just look it up and you'll be surprised on the mass of information and on the quality of information that the Schematismus contains on all these questions. Justizverwaltung, so the justice administration, security administration, and then, which is highly interesting, also Post- and Telegrafenämter. So the rising postal administration is represented in the Schematismus as well. And for those of you, and I'm looking at Rock here, for those of you interested in the Catholic Church is very well represented in the Schematismus as well. And I still did not find the forest administration, much to my regret. But the possible solution here is that the forest administration for Carniola was taken care of by the forest administration for Gorizia and Gradiška. So yeah, that's the answer to that. So now you know what the Schematismus actually was, or what it looked like. So it was a huge register that was published between 1702 and 1918, and it contains information on career tracks and on the details of the professional positions of a total of more than 200,000 individuals that were linked to the Habsburg administration, but not only to the administration, but also to its political elites, and also to economic elites, and not only elites. In places it reaches deep down into the social fabric of Central Europe. We have between 2,000 and 110,000 individuals per volume. So we have 2,000 names listed already in 1702, and we have almost 120,000 individuals in 1918, which is an enormous amount of information on a personal level. We have a total of 170 volumes. Each volume has between 200 and more than 2,000 pages. So we estimate that there is a total of more or less 150,000 pages. So basically, and let's put this the other way. The Schematismus is a terrible source when it comes to accessibility. Okay, you have the alex.onb.ac.at website, but you could already have a glimpse at it. It's difficult to navigate. You have to jump in and out, and it's multi-layered, and you only get one chapter at a time, and leafing through is not a good experience. So basically using the Schematismus is something else from actually seeing the Schematismus as a primary source. Basically, it tells us a real-time history of the institutional emergence of the Habsburg Monarchy from roughly 1700 to its end in 1918. And it not only tells us a collective biography of the people who lived in the Habsburg monarchy and who filled the administration with life and professional duty, but it is also a history of the Habsburg administration. As you can see, how the institutions emerged and which institutions actually worked because they were filled with people, and which institutions only existed on paper because they existed on paper, but nobody was working in it. And that is actually quite visible in the Schematismus. So there are some pages that are full of brackets, unbesetzt, unoccupied. And so that's it. So we consider the Schematismus a highly important, high profile and very relevant source towards a social history of the Habsburg Empire. Just a short look at the pages over time, starting with 1702. On the top left corner, you see here it's basically a list. Then we have 1789, so pick the year of the French Revolution. You can see it is still a list, but a more complex list. Then we move on to 1830. And finally, we have, I think that is 1910. So you see the complex layout is easy to read for us. It bears a great overview, but I would talk about the problems and challenges this constitutes with regard to automatic data processing in a minute. So we see some significant change with regard to the Schematismus. Something else on the distribution of data in the Hofenstaatshandbuch. So Hofenstaatshandbuch was the official name to the Schematismus, but everybody called it Schematismus basically. You find it under different titles, but it's one more or less continuous series of publications. Basically, what I have to add here is that it was a private enterprise in the beginning. So in 1702, there were private publishers in Vienna who considered this a business case, a viable business case. So they started to gather that information, to process it, and to sell it as printed books. And the business case appears to have been solid, because there was not just the one Schematismus that we are dealing with. There were parallel, concurrent publications as well. And Schematismen such as these were actually quite common all over Europe. So you find Schematismen for most smaller German principalities for the 18th century, sometimes earlier, 17th, sometimes even for the 16th century. And what else do we see here? It was a vibrant business with a lot of people in there. But basically, we can imagine this as a one-man show. So there was one person who was well familiar with pretty much everybody at court, and who was compiling this information on an annual basis, printing it and selling it. And things changed then in 1807. In 1807, so after the end of the Holy Roman Empire of Germanation, and the constitution of the Austrian Empire by Francis II, who then turned Francis I, the state took charge of the publication of the Schematismus. The Redaktion so there was a redaction committee that was constituted. We know very little about this redaction committee. We are still trying to reconstitute what we know about it from the archives, but unfortunately there is very little information left. What we know is that it was a very small group, and the Schematismus exploded between 1807 and 1816. So we have roughly 7,000 persons per year in the early 1800s, and starting from 1816, we then have more than 25,000 persons per year represented in the Schematismus. So this is when this source kind of really becomes something important. And particularly those of you familiar with the history of Habsburg Central Europe in the long 19th century, so in the era between the French Revolution and the end of the First World War, you might be well aware of the fact that particularly the first half of the 19th century is a period that still has a lot of questions for us. Nobody really understands the first half of the 19th century when it comes to social history. We keep talking about Biedermeier, but the background of the Biedermeier still remains to be explored. And with this regard, the Schematismus appears to be an excellent source. What you can see here, it looks like a barcode a little bit. So basically each black line represents one issue of the Schematismus. A thin black line is a single issue. A thicker black line is a double issue. Very thick black lines are multiple issues. And what you can see here is that we have two complete series of publications, one ranging from 1816 to 1848 and the other one ranging from 1876 to 1918. So that's the two largest and two most important chunks of data hidden in the Schematismus, if you want to put it that way. But then we also have a very interesting series from 1793 to 1808. So there's plenty of information inside it. And I think that the Schematismus can inform several fields of historical research. So it is relevant for early modern history. It is relevant for modern history when it comes to the 19th century. And it is even relevant for early contemporary history. When it comes to the technical questions of the Schematismus, one has to say that for a very long period of time, the font remains the key challenge. So the Fraktur font is difficult to translate automatically. And the Fraktur font only changes somewhere in the 1830s, I think. After that, the font is not the issue anymore, but the extremely complex layout. So have a look at that. It's a real nightmare. So starting from the 1870s, we are in a situation where automatic data extraction really becomes a major issue. Neo-absolutism is not the stellar period in the history of the Schematismus. We have very few publications for that period, ranging approximately from the early 1850s to the early 1860s. But in 1876, it picks up again. And here we have one page of the Schematismus. Let's have a closer look at the challenge of information extraction here. And I would say there are three key aspects that we have to keep in mind here. The first one is the sheer quantity of the material that needs to be processed here. It's an enormous amount of scans, which basically require new methods for analysis. Then the accessibility is another issue. So the complex layout renders the application of pretty much every off-the-shelf OCR more or less impossible. And full text search is not yet possible. And the third and probably most difficult aspect here is what we usually refer to as fractality. So each page of the Schematismus looks similar to the page prior to that and to the page following to that. But the problem is that the distances shift and many details shift, even down to the font size. So they let the font grow and shrink as it pleases the editors in charge of the single pages, which is part of a problem. But, yeah, well, maybe this is a good time to tell you something on how this was basically produced. Because when you have a redaction committee of only 10 to 12 people, and you have 110,000 people per year to process, which was the case from the mid-19th century onward, how are you proceeding? The answer to that question is that this redaction committee appears to have walked the same way every single year. They started in some ministry, I don't know which one. Well, maybe they started with the imperial court, and then they visited each single head office, requested the information on the people working there, completed their forms, made some sketches, carried that back to the Redaktionsgebäude in Vienna, where people started to produce the first sheets of the Schematismus. What did these sheets look like? So 16 pages constitute one huge sheet that you could print. And the Schematismus was actually printed throughout the whole year, okay? So on most working days, one or several 16-page sheets of the Schematismus were printed. So they started the production of the Schematismus in January and they ended in December. What does that mean? Not all of the information contained in one Schematismus has the same degree of actuality, okay? So if the Schematismus for 1890 is finished in December 1890, the information on the imperial court is already 11 months old, because this is where the Schematismus redaction committee started out in January. And then they move on to the ministries, sometimes in March, or let's say they finish in June. That's all just, default values, okay? We don't know when they visited the Ministry of Interior and more of these details. We could basically look it up because you find some minor information in the corner of the pages. But basically, we just know how this worked. So if any of you has ever seen that movie with Sean Connery, Hunt on the Red October, you know about sonar and radar, okay? Which is that green line of light that keeps circling a screen, and the Schematismus works in the same way. So the first quarter of the screen is the winter period, so January to March. Then the second quarter represents more or less April to June, July to September, and then finally the latest quarter is the quarter where the most recent information is, because these were the administrative institutions that were visited last. What does that mean? Due to the enormous amount of information, to the very few people who were in charge of verifying and raising this information, and to the general situation, we have a situation here that we have to say there is a certain degree of error in the printed issues of the Schematismus. And if you come across a scan of the Schematismus, or even across a printed copy of the Schematismus, you will frequently see that someone corrected information in the Schematismus. So the people in the administration who were using this source, they were correcting the information. And I would really say the Schematismus is a trough of precious information for us, but you should not rely on it. So if there is further archival information that you could consult and you don't have anything else to do, go to the archives and verify that the information that the Schematismus makes you believe is correct is actually correct. So this is a highly interesting insight for us, because there's such a lot of primary sources that are quite similar to the Schematismus, and they convey a certain authority upon us. We believe, oh my God, it's a huge bulk of printed serial information done by some of the finest minds of the 19th century. This is printed truth. It is not, and the degree to which it is not printed truth only becomes visible to us incrementally in the digital processing of that data. So this is one of the great experiences that we are doing here, because people have been interested in the Schematismus earlier, and people have tried to reconstruct the production process, but it is less the historical source work that helped us to understand the process behind it, but the preparations for the technical data extraction that offered us with additional insights on how that worked. Okay, fractality. Pages resemble each other, yet differ in small details, which is relevant here because early OCR and early layout detection is usually built on rule-based approaches. So you tell the computer, okay, you have one block of text in the upper left corner, and then you pass 0.5 centimeters downward, and then the next block of information begins. Unfortunately, with the Schematismus, it's more like one block of information someplace and another block of information 0.1 centimeters below. And on the next page, it's not 0.1, but it's 1.5 centimeters below. It's like that. So rule-based approaches do not get us anywhere. And for a very long period of time, rule-based approaches were pretty much the classical go-to with regard to that. So how do you get the information of something that looks, smells, and actually feels like the Schematismus? And the approach that we laid out naively was building basically on layout detection in the very first step. And I was naive enough to believe that this is actually the breaking point. So if you manage to apply layout detection with a sufficient precision, you're through with this task. Everything else is pretty much a standard process. We could not be more wrong, but let's talk about that a little bit later. In the first step, we addressed the issue of layout detection, and a downstream to layout detection, high precision OCR. We talk about the details a little bit later. In the next step, so once you have the different layout elements detected and transcribed via OCR, what are you going to do with the data? The next step basically is entity recognition. So each small chunk of text in the Schematismus might refer to the names of a person, to the title of a person, to the professional position of a person, to certain distinctions a person might have acquired, and so on. We also have place names, we have addresses, whatever there is. So in the first post-processing step, we plan on performing quality control, so check OCR once again, then perform entity recognition. And once you performed entity recognition, you can start modeling the data. Modeling the data in that regard means that you just put a tag on each name that you identify and say, yeah, that's a name. And you take another tag on each place that you identify and tell the computer that's a place, and so on. And you need to automatize that because, as you remember, it's just a lot of information. I said it's about 150,000 pages. And for each page, we expect to see between 100 and 350 text elements. So I can't even do the math to that degree, but we are here in the double-digit million single information entities contained in that source. And when it comes to data modeling, We were thinking of modeling the data as a knowledge graph. We can talk about the details a little bit later as well, if you want to. Okay, let's have a look at the first step. Layout detection and OCR. Just a short sneak preview. We have come quite far in the process now. So all of the steps that I described one page earlier, let's go back again. All of these steps have been prepared and are currently being carried out. So the key issue that we are dealing with right now is scaling up. So everything works with smaller chunks of Schematismus pages. Now we need to see what happens when we really dump entire years of Schematismus style PDFs into the pipeline, and let's see what it does. Does it cuff? Yes. Does it produce data that makes sense? To a certain degree, yes. But yeah, let's talk about pain a little bit later. So in the first step, layer detection and OCR. What you can see here is one page once layout detection ran over it. So the layout detection model is not correct anymore. So we are 2 or 3 generations further here. I'm trying to work economically here. So we have 2 engineers in the project from the Graz University of Technology. And unfortunately, they are both highly over-motivated and never want to work with anything but the newest and best performing models, which is good to a certain degree. But yeah, well, finally you run through 6 different models, and with the free eye, you just can't see a difference between the outputs of different models after the 3rd generation, and we are someplace in the 6th generation. So I'm going to have to put my foot down here and tell David to just continue working with what we have right now. Layout detection is the key to this process as we set it up, because basically the atomic piece of information contained in the schematismus is the person. So each person should be identified as a paragraph, and once you have the paragraph, you can ascertain every information contained in this paragraph on one single person, and you can break it up into different entities that you can then use for data modeling. That will become much clearer on the next slide. The precision in the layout detection that we obtained so far, and the we that I'm referring here to is always a scientific we. So Roman Kern and I, we are the project leads, but most of the work has been done by David Fleischhacker and some other guys working with us in our project. So the precision that we obtain when it comes to layout detection is roughly that 1 in 21,000 paragraphs is misclassified, which still amounts to a number of 5 to 6 wrongly classified person per year of the schematismus, if you just do the math, because you have to expect to see between 80 and 120,000 persons in one single year in the later 1800s. So 5 to 6 persons a year are misclassified. We are certain about that. Yet more important is the OCR precision. So the problem is when you have that amount of data, you need to invest into the precision of the recognition process. Otherwise, you will have to post-process the data, and this becomes unfeasible very soon. Because basically, I would say you cannot correct more than 20 to 30 pages per year of the schematismus, even in a project with a funding of almost 1.6 million euros. Otherwise, you will not be able to do the job. So our first shot went to increasing the recognition precision in this process. And the first thing is, and that's the good news, if you have a working layout detection module, you need to care less about OCR. So once layout is detected properly, OCR results will improve by themselves. The basic measure for the quality of OCR is the character error rate, CER. A character error rate in printed meta of 1 to 2% is considered the industry standard. And as you can see here, we managed to go significantly below that. So we have a character error rate of 0.2 to 0.3%. So we took a Kraken OCR module. Kraken OCR is a great module. Unfortunately, it is not precisely user-friendly. So we strongly recommend everybody who wants to run a larger amount of material with Kraken OCR to optimize it. And there are different possibilities to optimize Kraken OCR, and one of them is machine learning, so fine-tuning. You basically just give them a large number of samples of data that look exactly like the data that you want to process and tell them what that exactly means. And with a character error rate of 0.2 to 0.3%, you have another issue, because this is a character error rate that is significantly below the average rate of orthographic mistakes that is contained in historical texts. So you always have to ask yourself, is this an OCR error that I'm seeing here? Or did the guy who produced that piece of text just misspell the name or put a comma where there should be a dot and things like that? So we are in an area here where we cannot see very clear anymore, but I would say you cannot go much below these 0.2 to 0.3%, which means that in 1,000 characters, 2 or 3 are misclassified or misdetected. Which brings us to other issues here. In the third step, we are performing reading order detection. The reading order detection has nothing to do with OCR or layout detection. Reading order detection is only necessary so that we can sort the information later. Because what you can see here, the bright green, that's the paragraphs, and everything that is not bright green refers to other classes. So violet is interesting as well. Violet here is a big paragraph. Big paragraph means this is a person that was so important that it occupied the entire width of one page in once. And everything else are different header classes. Header classes are important here because in order to reconstruct the role of a person in the administration of the Habsburg Central European imperial administration, you need to go beyond the paragraph, and you also need to find out in which authority a person worked, what her work address was, and everything else. And that is information that is encoded in different headers. Okay, let's go one page further. What happens next? Let's say we have every information relevant for Mr. Wilhelm Kienzl, the Bürgermeister of Gradec, someplace in the late 19th century. Gradec is one of the towns with its own statute, and it further belongs to the header of political district authorities. So we have a total of 4 different headers and 1 paragraph, and we need information from these 4 different headers and this 1 paragraph just to produce a correct data set referring to the mayor of Gradec in the late 19th century. And the main tasks here are, so we are using LLMs here, large language models. Everybody knows ChatGPT or Claude. This is not what we are using. We are using a Mistral model, which is a smaller European LLM that one can run locally if you have significant GPU power at hand, which we do, fortunately. One of the perks of working with technical fanatics, they always want to have the newest swag, and they keep nagging you until you finally find some money and buy them what they want. But the great thing here is you can run your LLM locally, which means that you do not kick your valuable research data into the US American cloud and help them for free to further train their LLM business. The LLM can do a lot of different things, but it is not easy to make them do what you want them to do. For once, they are notorious hallucinators, so they tend to invent things. That is something that one can control if you find people with a sufficient experience and a certain understanding of how transformer-based algorithms work. So the fundamental idea for us was to use these LLMs to control the OCR quality. Okay, you see, we have a character error rate of 0.2 to 0.3. I said that's more than enough. David said, but it's just the beginning. So what we do here is, now that's a little bit of a detail, we are running each piece of text through two different OCR engines. And both OCR engines work according to different principles. The first one is a classical OCR that has been improved with machine learning methods. Machine learning methods in that case means RNN. I think that's a recursive neural network. So it is something that can look backward, and yeah, let's say it looks at Ljubljana, and then it starts to translate Liu, and then comes blue, and then it is not certain whether this is I or A or W or A, and it looks backward and say, Ljubl, I never read Ljubljana, it must be Ljubljana. So that's how RNNs work. And the second one is a transformer-based OCR model. Transformer-based OCR model is basically a very small LLM with a certain visual language model capacity. So it looks at the entire word and starts to guess what this might mean, given that it starts with a capital L. And in the next step, we compare the outcomes of these two. As we experienced that the Kraken OCR model is performing slightly better, the Kraken OCR model has the priority in case of doubt. The other OCR model has to, in the next step, we take the outcomes of the two OCR models and we ask an LLM, say, that's the input signal, so that's this entire snippet. What would you make of that input snippet? And in very few cases, the LLM then improves the result, so to say. But that's just a minor detail. So to say, we were planning on doing some quality control using LLMs here. But basically what the LLM is charged with here is entity recognition. So it has to tell us what is a name, what is a place, what is a title, what is some further additional information, just according to that schema that I have here. Class of the snippet is paragraph, surname Kienzl, name Wilhelm, academic title, profession, and then the function, the location, attribution, institution, things like that. Working. And then we map everything into a knowledge graph. And each color of a node refers to a different kind of information. So a person node is orange here. A function node is the brighter green here. A high-ranking level of institution is a darker green here. A profession is blue here, okay? So you get the concept behind it. Knowledge graph style data modeling is really useful when it comes to research networks of people and institutions and places. It's working quite well with this regard. Yeah, so that is the result, and we are working with a Neo4j, so that's the background here. And we are again planning on doing this LLM driven. So users should be able to communicate with a chat interface and just ask the chat interface. I heard there was some guy named Wilhelm Somewhat who must have been mayor of Graz sometimes in the 1800s. Can you help me with that? And then it will turn this into a search query for Neo4j and return the results to you. Or you can go the hard way and encode your request into the window, and it will return results for you. Extraction strategies, so just how are we working here? What are we going to do here? In the first step, we are planning on extracting the entire series of information from 1876 to 1918. We were starting to do that in July 2025. We are planning on finishing here in December 2026. And we are, I can hear myself. Yeah, we are still on schedule here. So the basic challenge here really is scaling up the process. I really have to say I severely underestimated the calculation power it takes. So you can basically imagine that 1 year takes half a day of high performance computing. So we gave David 4 RTX 5090 GPU nodes, and he was silly enough to place all of them in his apartment. And last week was very cold, and he told me that he was working in his underwear, I suppose, because it had 35 degrees in his living room. And the permanent electricity consumption was somewhere around 2.1 kilowatts. And he did not dare to boil some soup in parallel to that because he was really concerned that his electricity supply could go down. Well, that much on the perks of working in the home office. He could come to the office as well, and I have severe doubts that our office infrastructure would endure that kind of energy consumption on an extended period of time. But we are running up a high performance computing node in the basement, in the server room of the university. And you could use that, of course. But yeah, some of you might know, you for sure, that there is a significant difference between consumer GPU hardware and server GPU hardware. And the great thing about consumer GPU hardware that we are using here currently is that it is working a little bit faster than the server infrastructure. But basically, you can imagine this is a significant calculation effort. And yeah, come back to some of the details a little bit later. In the second part of the data extraction, we are going to extract the series from 1816 to 1848. So you can see around 65% of the total personal data of the Schematismus is contained in the last semi-century of the series. So the last 25% of the Schematismus contain more or less 2/3 of the data. But I calculated that another 27% is then in the 32 years between 1816 and 1848. And we are going to start with this process late next year, and we hope to be able to finish in spring 2028. And the third step is the extraction of the remaining data sets and the dispersed data sets of the 18th century, basically. So that's just an overview of the project team. So that's the sub-project leads, but we have a very international group, and some of the persons present in this room are closely involved with the project, and we are looking forward to discuss first results and to disperse first results to the research community. We hope to be able to do so sometimes next year. Just something on the major challenge that we did not expect to see, which is if you extract serial data from a historical source, you always have the issue that, let's say, you extract one bag of data for 1876, and then you extract another a set of data for 1877 and 1888 until 18N or 19N. And once you're finished with that, you need to identify a person in one bag of data, and then in the next bag of data, and then in the third bag of data, and in the fourth, and so on. We call this disambiguation. So you have to make sure that the Rox-Dagar of 1876 is the same Rox-Dagar that shows up in 1877, and that Nea Bly from 1878 might be the same person as in 1885. How do you do that? And there are several things that we can see that you can do here. We first believe we would hand everything over to an LLM and let the LLM do the job. You know, we just build your own ChatGPT, dump him the data and tell him, yeah, you find this person for me. That's pretty much impossible when it comes to computational power. So what we are doing here is simple string matching, okay? So every single paragraph that is extracted is transcribed then. And we do that for every single year. That's part of the standard process. And then you just run a search algorithm and make the comparison. And you can sort out up to 92% of all data from one year for the next year. And then you can go from the next year further. So you reduce the amount of data that you have to deal with on an annual basis. You boil it down to below 10%. And with these 10%, in the next step, you can do another set of string research, of string search and say, okay, let's show me strings that look very similar to the one I have here with, let's say, differences less than 10% and then differences less than 20%. And then you can feed that into an LLM and ask it, do you think that's correct? Do you think that's the same person? Yes, no, maybe. Working very well. But basically, this is running very well for persons. Where we encounter severe issues right now is with organizations. As it turns out, people wrote organizations in very different ways. And we have a test data set here, which we chose because we believed it would be much simpler than the real Schematismus because it does not contain any titles. And what else does it not contain? Yeah, much less context information, the so-called compass. I think it refers for Krein as well. And with the compass data, you have companies and persons linked with these companies. It was easy for us to identify the persons and it was easy for us to match the persons over the years. Yet the shit hit the fan when it came to identifying the companies. So 12,000 different companies that we know of were blown up by the extraction process to 140,000 because the guys that were doing the data sheets 150 years ago, they were just writing companies in all fantastic sorts of ways. And that appears to be a real issue. So we are kind of concerned because if we see a same situation with the Schematismus, this might be kind of interesting. So there are technical ways to handle this. by, yeah, basically just running comparisons or modeling the data as knowledge graphs and then say, okay, there is one person that is not linked to 12 different companies that all sound the same, but with a certain degree of likelihood, this is all the same company. Yeah. So basically that's where we are right now. So it's more of a workshop report. But I think that we should finish here for now, and let's see if there are some questions from your side. Just so much that the layout detection and the OCR tool and everything else, we are planning on publishing that with eScriptorium. I cannot tell you anything on the temporal schedule here yet, but I asked Georg Vogeler yesterday, and we are preparing to do this. Not earlier than next year, but that has nothing to do with our solutions that are just working nicely right now. But it's just a matter of administration, and no one actually knows where eScriptorium is going to. Basically, it's a great project, and the tools it offers are performing greatly, but it's nothing that you use to transcribe some 5,000 pages that you stumble across in your grandmother's attic on a Sunday evening, and then you just run it through a scanner and decide, oh, let's give it a try with eScriptorium. It's just not working this way. It requires a lot of setup and a lot of fine-tuning in order to process the data properly. Okay, thank you for your attention right now, and feel free to ask me anything if there is anything unclear.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No? I have a question. So, first, I know it's not now, it's in the future, but how will this data be accessible? Is there a user interface you will just search like an app, or you can get the database, or how it will work then?
Both, basically. So we are going to put the data sets, different data sets, because, we are kind of versioning the data. So each extraction run yields another set of data, and we expect to see that people are going to start work with a data set yielded in an early extraction run. And well, someone builds a database built on that, and then he comes back because he loses the data set 2 years later and finds out, yeah, well, they have moved on and are publishing another version now, which looks much different from what I used to use 2 years ago. So we are planning on issuing versioned data sets via different repositories. Yeah, the GAMS repository is, of course, it's the closest one for us, but there are other ones, and we're talking with the national libraries, of course, in order to make them host the data, because the Austrian National Library first ran the scans, so they could also host the data, which would make it much easier for users to just look up everything. And then there will be an internet portal that you can use on a day-to-day basis, which will be easier to handle, because querying graph databases is not a funny task, I have to say. And it is also difficult for historians, I think. So the project in itself represents a brutal challenge when it comes to the confrontation of a quantitative data extraction and qualitative historical research. So I think that is something that we have to address here. We have to allow people to find data in the way that they are used to find data, by just querying a database and still being able to find out something about relevant networks and things like that. So basically, we think 80% of the people will rather use a web interface, but there might be 20% who would like to beat themselves up with a sheer data sets. Hmm? Hmm?
Also, our research groups had also some experience regarding this problem with layouts, with also so on, but not on this level with those sort of data, but with the newspapers. And one of our colleagues, not present here, is really concerned how to extract layouts for example, for commercials in the newspapers. This is very difficult to process and so on. So, but one of the main concerns regarding when we are talking about such large collection of the data, and we know that that on one side, collection this data can never be exact. There are always mistakes. Mistakes are part of this process, part of the how it is built on, and so on. And in this case, we have on the one side the historians that want to have exact data for every person, for everything. This is quite also utopian thinking, because it is not possible. It is always we always need to make the link from original from the process data to original copy from the archive, to the facsimile, so to say. In this case, of course, when you will put data in this way on the GAMS, it will be exactly what we find for the historians that can always check out in the facsimiles when the data are processed in the right way. But maybe for thinking for your perspective, what is? We now came to big question. We have built some sort of the data collections, have data, process, also delivered humanities way. But what to do this? What is the research question? Not it is not when we build these large collections to find data. This is one way. But what to do and what is the research question for the projects to process data in the different way and find some other research question that are not possible to be processed in the way that that is obvious for the historians, not only to search information, but with especially when you are thinking about this entity linking with to the years and to the organizations. This is really great material to come up with new research questions that are not yet in the minds of the historians. When you ever think about that, something like that.
It's a challenging situation, actually, because, we see a lot of scanned material right ahead of us, easily accessible. Newspapers, of course, are a fantastic source. And for many of the people featuring in the Schematismus, we find lots of information in different newspapers as well. And this leads us to believe that the 19th century could be, at least the 19th century, because for the 19th century, we really have a huge quantity of data, particularly if you think of parish matricula, for instance. And you could really think of, how to put this? It's less utopia, but it's almost dystopic of thinking, for a certain proportion of Central European populations of the 19th century, we could be able to reconstruct those parts of their lives at which they necessarily left traces with public administration. Because this is something that computational methods will help us to put together into a certain kind of data representation that will be searchable web-based sooner or later. We already have we see some beginnings for that. For instance, Matricula Online, Anno, and the Schematismus. Right now, it is not automatically possible to look for, I don't know, a certain person, because the OCR quality in the newspaper editions frequently is quite poor. There is not even full text search capacity for the Staatshandbuch available. And let's not talk about parish matricula. But the historical issue here is a completely different one. Of course, linking persons to the different spellings under which they figure, that's an entirely different issue. And it's extremely complex and difficult, because even names that you would not consider super popular, for instance, Karl Nijedli, shows up 3 times for years on end in the Schematismus. And it's quite difficult actually to keep them apart, even though they were not even working in a remotely close area. So the disambiguation of persons is less a technical, but a truly historical question here. What happens once we turn our primary sources into large data sets, and how do we make sure that these large data sets can be accounted for the information they give us in a way that historians working with that kind of data can always check whether this spelling, interpretation, attribution, whatsoever, remains reconstructible and can be verified and contested in the latest instance. With the Schematismus project, it's easy, because we are adding a layer here where experts working with the data can provide us with feedback and say, yeah, well, this person is highly unlikely to be the same person of the same name who used to be working in the same authority like 2 years earlier. Things like that, But it's really difficult to process this data and to make it available without adding too much interpretation. I hope you know what I mean.
Should be a follow-up connected to what Andrea was asking, and also to what you were saying about this dialogue between, say, digital scholars and historians, or data scholars and historians. So this is, if I understand correctly, I apologize, I came 5 or 10 minutes later, so I missed a part of the explanation in the beginning about the source. But if I understand correctly, this is basically amounts to a history of public administration in the empire, right?
Yeah, not entirely.
I mean, the question is, what's your hypothesis about the history of public administration that you can address with this data? I'm sure that there are plenty. And I mean, connecting with this, and this is just a question because I maybe didn't understand some of the history of the Schematismus. If I understand correctly, the Schematismus evolves in a way in which over the years it becomes much more exhaustive, is it? Or just, I mean, does it reflect the growth of public administration, or it only becomes more exhaustive because it includes new branches of government administration? Which of both? And in this case, if it's the second one, if it's the first one, or how do you deal with the very complicated challenge of analyzing all of these different parts of the corpus, which are difficult to compare because they are composed differently? Again, maybe you addressed some of this in the beginning and I didn't.
Now I get the question. So sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the historical research question here is twofold. And one key issue here is that the technical realization of the project consumes so much of the time and the resources that the historical research question actually steps into the background for an extended period of time. But for once, our research hypothesis is that the Schematismus reflects to a certain degree the expansion of the Habsburg Monarchy from the 18th century into some sort of modern statehood in the second half of the 19th century, and that it also reflects a growing degree of public participation in political processes via the growing participation of people of middle class descent in the public administration. And we can see that in several fields. So there are two research work packages dealing with that. Package 5 is dealing with the institutions. Package 4 is dealing with the individuals. So we hope to see how we hope to be able to differentiate different social groups in the data set because we can track families intergenerational to a certain degree. So we can see, okay, these are families of a certain standing that we can already see in the 18th century, and descendants of these families we can observe pursuing the family business, the careers throughout the 19th century. And then we have social risers, so people who show up in the public service, for instance, in the 1820s and in the 1830s. And we can just see, okay, this and this person has a doctor juris or some other kind of academic degree. And then we are planning on adding further data sets that are partly available already. So we have plenty of information from universities, for instance. So the Universitätsnationale, for instance. So the student enrollment lists. And we have sketches of biographies of students from the mid-19th century onward, approximately. That is something that could be used and that we can work with, particularly when it comes to the fact that there was only a limited number of universities in Habsburg Central Europe that appear to be really relevant for that question here. When it comes to the institutions, I have my own hypothesis, which is that the Habsburg monarchy of the 18th century was built very closely around an inner core of institutions, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of War, and there was a third one that I keep forgetting all of the time. But this is basically the nucleus of public administration, and it expanded twice in the run of the 19th century. For the first time, it was expanded by such institutions such as, for instance, the Ministry of the Interior. But more interestingly, from the 1850s onwards, so in the middle of neo-absolutism, we see the arrival of ministries such as the Ministry of Public Buildings, railway, telegraphs, things like that. And each of these three, so I compare it to three concentric rings. The inner ring is the old nucleus core of imperial rule. The second one is the first ring of modernization. And the third one is highly interesting because we can observe in the emergence of this third ring how a public institution, I don't like to say state here, it's some place between state and empire, and it is really difficult to track because you can see even inside the administration in the course of the 19th century in the Habsburg Empire, you have different groups arguing into different directions. So the high-ranking imperial administrators under Francis II First, for instance, say state in the one context and say empire in the other context. And they appear to be using this terminology quite consciously and quite strategically. So they don't want to tell the emperor that he's actually running a state, and they don't want to tell the subjects slash citizens that they are actually living in an empire. So we see different audiences being addressed here, and we are interested in the institutional mechanics below that. So what happens on the layer of administration? Where is a journey, for instance, able to add a tiny administrative Wurmfortsatz? You know, that tiny piece that doctors usually consider superfluous and cut out whenever it starts to hurt. We see plenty such minor interventions, frequently led by administrators in the course of the 19th century here. And we believe that an entire data set of the Schematismus will help us to address such processes more directly. And we are really interested in seeing where this leads to. But basically, I'm quite convinced that you will still need further additional archival sources, but the Schematismus can help you to show you where to look for the material that you actually need. Because right now it is usually you go to the Vienna, to the state archives, you're getting annoyed with the people working there, and then you end up with an interesting data set that is quite remote from what you were actually looking for. And this data set could help us to ask better questions to the funny people working at the Viennese State Archive. But yeah, of course, there are other relevant archives dispersed all over Central Europe that in most cases serve you much better.
Questions. The empire was famously multilingual, but these Handbücher don't always or generally don't reflect that when it comes to names. And you showed us the page for Carniola, which had, I think I noticed that Johann Bleiweiss.
Yeah.
And most of us know him as Janez Bleiweiss, and he mostly used the name Janez, especially in the Slovene context. So how are you dealing with that? Do you plan to add these names, or and where do you get them from?
Yeah.
And then there's a second question: do you see in the future tackling the military Handbücher, the Schematismus des Heeres as well, or is this just?
Well, basically the thing is, once we have the methodology in place, it will be easy to run further Schematismen as well. So this Staatshandbuch is just one Schematismus of many. There was also the Eisenbahn-Schematismus, and there is, of course, the military Schematismus. You can access the military Schematismus via the website of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, I think. They published it, and it can be full text queried. So it's much easier to handle than this one. But on the other hand, you don't have the data structure in the background available. When it comes to the question of the multilinguality, this is highly relevant and interesting. Basically, yeah, you see, now it would be great if I had my computer here, but I can show that to you later. We differentiate between a data layer and an interpretation layer, okay? And in the interpretation layer, everyone should be able to add additional information that he or she considers relevant and interesting here. And such cases would be highly interesting here. With regard to the Schematismus, we have another issue here, because the Schematismus was not only published in German, it was published in other languages as well. The most important example here is the Hungarian Schematismus. And we are planning on running a comparison here to see whether the Hungarian Schematismus and the German Schematismus, to what degree do they publish the same information? To what degree does the spelling of the names differ and things like that? But this is something that needs to be explored. It should be explored soon, I think. But the problem is that we first need the data so that we can we can run a data set comparison here to a certain degree, but this is something that has a very, very high priority with us. But the thing here really is, Schematismen were highly redundant. You know, they had one Staatshandbuch, and then there are 5 or 6 other publications that look pretty much similar in different languages that just deviate in details. We know very little about that. We just know that empire, pardon my French, started to, shoot out information and certain knowledge it produced on every patch of free space it could find from some point in the second half of the 19th century. And this is an interesting process because this is at the same time you need to consider this as one of the key strategies of the administration to further the reach of their own authority.
Yeah, Nick?
How did you manage to convince the LLM to do the work of the identity recognition properly?
Sorry?
This is a question asked by a historian. How did you manage to convince the LLM to do the work of make identity recognition properly?
Well, we host a Mistral Small locally on an RTX 5090. It fits barely into the VRAM. So these GPUs have a VRAM of 32 gig approximately, and you can squeeze it on that. You turn the temperature down and you use several layers of system prompts. So I think we have 3 or 4 layers of system prompts, and each prompt restricts the replying capacity of the underlying LLM to a certain degree. This is a strategy that is not working similarly well with all LLMs. From what we can see, DeepSeek is kind of a loose cannon, but Mistral is for us a good partner. It's reliable, and you have a certain expectation horizon that you can steer through. That's working nicely, I have to say.
Anyone else? Any question on Zoom? No. Okay, then we can finish for today. Thank you very much again for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And before we stop, I was asked to promote the next event we have at 3 o'clock. So if you're not too tired, you have time to go to lunch and come back. In the series of the History on the Edge today, we'll lecture Sena Šimek, the title Between Judgment and Perception, the ICT narrative on Croatia's role in the war in the Bosnia and Herzegovina and the domestic reaction. Okay. Thank you again, and hope to see you soon on another DARIAH event.